Hey guys, this is James Kleimann, the managing editor at HousingWire, and I'm joined by Brooklee Han. She's a real estate reporter at HousingWire, and it's a pretty crazy day. Brooklee and I have been go today, and the reason why is, of course, there's been a huge settlement regarding the spate of commission lawsuits and home sellers and the National Association of Realtors. And so Brooklee's been covering this case since day one, and we want to break down kind of quickly, one, what this means for the NAR, but more importantly, what this means for the agents and the brokers and the other housing professionals who are going to be very affected by this ruling. It is a significant ruling, and let's get right into it. So, Brooklee, maybe you could share some of the top line figures. How much did the NAR settle for? And maybe just some key takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely. So the settlement amount was $418 million, and this amount will be paid over the course of 4 years per the NAR. And the funds will be deposited into a trust that's controlled by the court. In addition to the damages payment, the settlement also bans the NAR from establishing any sort of rules that would allow a seller's agent to set compensation for a buyer's agent. And there's also additional provisions noting that the ability to display broker compensation on MLSs must be eliminated. So those fields are no longer allowed to be there. And then there's also a blanket ban on the requirement that agents must subscribe to MLSs in the first place in order to offer or accept compensation for their work. And then the third kind of major thing is that buyer broker agreements are also now mandated by the settlement agreement. So in order to work with a buyer, an agent must have a written agreement with that buyer, kind of outlining the terms of their working relationship, as well as how that buyer broker, the amount that buyer broker will be compensated. And the buyer broker could still be compensated by the listing agent. That is still allowed.
Let's get into that in just a second because there's a lot to unpack there, and I think that really is sort of my major takeaway. And then we'll get to that in just a moment. But maybe, Brooklee, can we start breaking down? So this $418 million, it's going to be paid over 4 years. Who's included in that? It's not everyone, right?
No, it isn't everyone. So if your brokerage in 2022 had a transaction volume that was $2 billion or less, you are released from any and all lawsuits that you and any liability that you may have had. And you are included as part of the NAR's settlement. If you are, let's say, Compass, and your transaction volume in 2022 was over $2 billion, you are not included in the settlement. And so if you're one of those big national brokerages, the NAR did negotiate kind of terms of potential release where you can, work with the NAR and the plaintiff's attorneys in the court to negotiate a settlement of your own to be released from these lawsuits. And there's a formula that would determine the amount that you would have to pay to be part of this settlement, and that those funds would go toward the settlement fund as well. And this goes for these larger brokerages who had a transaction volume above 2 billion, as well as MLSs that are not realtor affiliated, that may also have been named in some of these lawsuits.
Right. So Rebney is one. They've been named to a couple up in Washington State, right? That's sort of the de facto MLS up there. They're going to have to fight their own battles here. And also, if you're at Home Services or one of the affiliates, you are not included in the settlement terms. And so that fight goes on. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, I think, some of the main takeaways, right? So the participation rule that has been really kind of the matchstick, right? I mean, all of these cases are argued around the idea that this participation rule has been used as a vehicle to inflate commissions for years now. It's gone, right? It is entirely going away as of, I think it's mid-July, is it right?
Yes.
And in its place, there will be mandated terms of buyer broker agreements. And so I wanted to get into kind of what this means practically. So we're still gathering all the details, but this generally aligns with the Commission Impossible thesis put forth by the analysts at KBW, which is essentially this is going to be a very disruptive change to the industry's commission structure, and this will put some downward pressure on buyer agent commissions and just buyer agent usage over time. There is a workaround, and you teased it a little bit earlier. Can you tell me a little bit more about this workaround? So if you are a seller and you still think that it's in your best interests to compensate a buy-side agent, you're allowed to do that. There's nothing that prohibits you in the law or the settlement from doing that. But how do you practically do it? Like what does it look like now going forward as of mid-July?
Yeah. So, one way you could do this is, say a buyer broker reaches out and says, "Hey, my client is interested in purchasing your property." If you, as the seller, have already told your listing agent, "Hey, I want to offer some buyer broker compensation, or I want to offer the buyer, $25,000 in as a rebate or a closing cost coverage that they can use to cover buyer broker fees, closing costs, whatever," you can totally do that. And that can be a part of the negotiation that occurs between, you and your agent and the buyer and their agent as well. And then if a brokerage wanted to set up its own kind of non-MLS database, because the settlement only says that brokers can't advertise compensation on the MLS, if they have a different database, they could potentially say, "Hey, I have this listing. My seller is willing to offer X amount in buyer broker fees." That's still, based on the terms of the settlement agreement and conversations I've had with legal experts, that is something that can still occur.
Right, that's permitted. And my understanding is if one does want to look into another workaround, I believe that for each property, you could place the compensation in the broker confidential remarks section, and that is a searchable field in the MLS, and so it would allow buyer agents to search by compensation. But of course, that could be problematic depending on how all of this ends up getting kind of figured out in the terms of the settlement. Right, the settlement is not a guarantee technically, but I understand that you spoke with Michael Ketchmark, the primary attorney for the plaintiffs in the Sitzer-Burnett case, and he thinks this is basically it, right?
Yes, yeah. So I spoke with Michael Ketchmark this morning, and yes, he feels that there is a very strong chance of this being approved by the judge in the Sitzer-Burnett case in Kansas City, and that that he's confident that this will kind of be it in terms of the NAR's saga with at least the Sitzer-Burnett suit and some of these other major commission lawsuits. Obviously, that's yet to be seen in actuality, but he's fairly positive that this will move forward.
There are two other major factors, though, right? So we do have the DOJ looming large, as they usually do in cases of this nature. Have you gotten a sense yet of whether the DOJ will intervene? They did in the No Select case. Now, when I look at the agreement that has been struck by the NAR and the attorneys here, it looks like a lot of the things the DOJ has been asking for, maybe not asking might not be the right word there, but the DOJ has sought in terms of structural changes in commissions. So is there a sense that the DOJ is going to be happy with this settlement, or maybe that this doesn't have everything they want?
Obviously in reading the settlement agreement and also comparing that to the things that the DOJ asked for in their statement of interest in the No Select lawsuit, I see that this aligns pretty well with the things that they were asking for. I know historically, Michael Ketchmark has been in conversation with the DOJ. I don't know if that's the case right now. But if that is the case, he has been in conversation with them more recently, and, he has this confidence that the settlement will be approved, then maybe the DOJ won't get involved. But honestly, that's speculation.
Have you heard from any agents today? Have you heard any reactions from them? I've gotten so many calls from loan officers and mortgage professionals saying, hey, man, what does this mean? What's happening to some of my referral partners? Does this mean that I have some sort of an advantage because maybe I have a direct relationship with buyers that previously would have been, already working with an agent, and I didn't have that maybe upper hand?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard from a ton of agents today. Some of them are, very confused. Obviously, this is a major change, and the language of the settlement is not necessarily the most or the easiest to understand. But the ones I've spoken with others as well, and they are obviously this isn't the ideal outcome, but it's better than some of the other outcomes that have been floated around for sure. And they feel that for the agents that are you know that are able to articulate their value proposition and kind of are really strong and know the business well, know their market, have those strong relationships with clients, they will be able to continue to be successful, and still, you know, have a job and make a living doing this. They also feel that buyer's agency will not be going away. It may look a little different. The relationship between the buyer and the buyer's agent may look a little different now as well. But they don't see that going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think just from the people that I've spoken to, the conversations that I've had, one, you'll need to ensure as a buy-side representative that you're actually providing value. Because previously, I think even if it wasn't pertaining to the law, the practical reality of being a buy-side agent is, oh, well, the seller is going to pay for my compensation, and that's great. But now, in some cases, I think it's going to be different, and the buyer is going to maybe have a higher standard if they feel out of pocket. They're paying $5,000, $6,000, whatever it ends up being. And then, of course, now there's going to be a lot more negotiation on the buy side that previously didn't really occur. And then, of course, there are questions about how VA buyers and lower income buyers are going to fare, given that many of them will not be able to afford representation and may go without, right? And I think sellers of properties in that bracket may also similarly feel like we don't need to compensate because there are so many potential buyers that are interested, and we don't need to, or we have a strong hand here, right? So that there are probably a lot of interesting conversations that we've had in mid-July is my guess here. But Brooklee, thank you so much for joining with me today. I really appreciate you breaking this all down for us. We have full coverage of the settlement, and next week, Brooklee, myself, and the rest of the HousingWire newsroom will be doing a ton of different stories about pretty much how everyone is affected by this across the landscape in housing. So thanks, everybody. If you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments, and Brooklee and I will try to get to as many as possible. Thanks, guys.